So they did better screening later on. But she said that there was a lot that needed to be done about rape education and first interventions for these women. So she started that center. Well, the thing about this is, I mean, how many women do we suppose were raped while the wrong Jackson, they both had the name Jackson, but they weren't related, while the wrong Jackson was locked up? So you see, this is very much a public safety issue. It's important that we get the right person. And we're going to try to make some headway in terms of training. I'll come back to that later and tell you some of the things we're doing. Well, how often does this happen? Was one of the first things we were confronted with was, how often does this happen? Is this a big problem, a small problem? The bottom line is nobody knows for sure because no systematic data are kept anywhere in the world on wrongful conviction. There are lists of cases of known wrongful convictions, but if you say, what's the percentage of cases in which this happens, we don't know. Now, you've all taken courses in crime and criminal justice, and we have a similar problem with estimating crime, right? We don't know how much crime there really is, but in the area of estimating crime, we're pretty far ahead because we have the official arrest data, and then we have the victimization surveys. So by doing victimization surveys, we know there's a lot more crime than gets reported, and certainly more than ever leads to arrest. So we can extrapolate a little bit. But here, I mean, this is a much more serious challenge to estimate the magnitude of wrongful conviction. There's a lot of people out there in prison right now who are innocent. And as I like to say, the great majority of them are guilty, by the way, because I used to work with them. A lot of them claim they're innocent, they're not. They're guilty. But a lot of them out there are innocent, but we just don't know it. And if they don't have the means to keep fighting for their case and they don't have supporters outside, most of these people are poor people. They don't have middle or upper class skills. They don't have political clout. Unless they have some biological evidence, they don't have much chance of getting this reversed. Now today, because of the Innocence Project in New York and other innocence projects, there's one here in Kentucky, I understand, that some of you folks are working with, where there's biological evidence like DNA that's been preserved and hasn't been tested, we can take a look and see if we got the wrong person. And there's an act that I'll talk about toward the end of my lecture in Congress that would guarantee that right to every inmate who requests it. If you say, I want biological evidence tested, you should have the right to have it tested. So, well, we decided we'd estimate how often this happens. So Aryeh, my Israeli student, and I initially did a survey. And we decided to have a conservative sample because this is so controversial, at least in the 80s particularly, that we didn't want anybody to accuse us of having a sample that was stacked in the direction of estimating high error rates. We wanted to see what would people who really work in the system think in terms of the error rate. So we can't confuse this with the real magnitude because these are estimates, right? These are not data like we say we know for sure what it is. But what we did was we surveyed in the state of Ohio, which is a pretty representative state, we surveyed, what was our total? 353 people. And these were, prosecutors, judges, law enforcement officials, the chiefs of police of the 7 largest cities, the prosecutors of all 88 counties in Ohio, the presiding judges of all of the common pleas courts, which is a felony court jurisdiction in Ohio. And we only had 20-some public defenders. So it was really stacked towards people that you would think would be apologists for the system because they are people who have prominent positions in the system. And then we had, as our national sample, 54 attorneys general, all 50 states and 4 territorial possessions. And we asked on this survey, what cases do you know about in your jurisdiction? What cases have you heard about in other jurisdictions? And then finally we said, of all felony convictions, what percentage, based on your experience, do you think would be likely to be errors? It's an estimate. Well, we then took their answers, and the great majority of them said less than 1%. They did not say 0. A few people did say 0, which means I guess they don't read the papers to say 0. But the great majority said less than 1%. So then we took the midpoint of the category between 0 and 1%, just so we have a stable estimate, we said, okay, let's just say that it's half of 1%, since that's where they clustered, less than 1%. Well, that sounds pretty good if you say that we are 99.5% accurate in the United States until you do the multiplication. It turns out that if that's true, then in the index crimes alone, just for the 8 most serious crimes, we have about 7,500 wrongful convictions every year. And that's because we have such a large system. You know, we end up having about 2 million arrests for these crimes, and you start to look at the conviction rate and multiply that out times half of 1%. It doesn't take a very large error rate to generate thousands of cases. Now, so just using the most recent UCR data, that would be about 7,500 cases a year. Now, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, who founded the Innocence Project in New York at Cardozo Law School, they recently took a database that they had available to them that's actually a law enforcement database, where there were 18,000 criminal cases that had biological evidence available. And they subjected, in these cases, they were subjected to one DNA test. And guess what happened? In those 18,000 cases, one DNA test cleared 25% of all prime suspects. These were the guys law enforcement had zeroed in on as the prime suspects in these cases. One biological test said they couldn't have done it. So this begins to raise serious questions. Now, most of our cases don't have biological evidence available to be tested, so we can only speculate what the error rates might be there. Well, what are the causes of wrongful conviction? We know in the United States and in Canada that the factors are pretty much the same. Eyewitness error, overzealous law enforcement officers and prosecutors who engage in misconduct, including withholding evidence, false and coerced confessions and suggestive interrogations, perjury, misleading lineups, the inappropriate use of informants or snitches, the ineffective assistance of counsel, community pressure for conviction, forensic science errors, incompetence, and fraud, and what we called in our book, the term we coined was the ratification of error. And what we meant by that was the tendency for higher levels in the system to rubber stamp decisions that are made at lower levels without engaging in careful review of what went on. Now, I hasten to add, usually more than one factor is involved. And we said this in our book. It's now been confirmed by many other studies, including Scheck's work. Interaction effects are going on. It's not just one thing. You know, for example, police or prosecutorial overzealousness. A law enforcement officer, prosecutor, well-intentioned, almost always well-intentioned, very seldom are they setting out to frame somebody with bad intention, but they believe this guy's a real scumbag. And maybe he's got a prior record, and he was in the area, and you know, this is a pretty good fit. So let's get him off the streets, and we can probably do that better if we can only help the jury along a little bit, suggest a few things to them. And in doing that, we're going to protect public safety. Well, guess what? They might not be protecting public safety. They might be putting William Jackson in prison while Dr. Jackson keeps committing rapes. So, and by the way, the Columbus police did a great job that night when they caught Dr. Jackson because, as I recall, he was doing his thing. By the way, he got the list of these women from the hospital where he worked. He was a physician, and he would go rape these women who had been in the hospital recently. So one night there was a young couple, as I recall, they were up late, making love or something, I don't know. They were up late, they heard a noise next door. So they called the police. They saw some guy, it looked like he had a mask on. And the Columbus police did everything by the book. They surrounded the house, they got him, and they didn't touch his car until they got a search warrant, and in his car was a list of all the rape victims, which the defense tried to suppress, but they were not able to suppress it, and so that's how they got him convicted. They finally got a break in that case. I'd still like to go back, by the way, and see what unsolved rape cases or maybe wrongful convictions there were everywhere where he lived. Before he became a doctor in Columbus, he was, you know, lived in different cities around the country. I think it'd be fascinating to see, while he was in the area, what kind of stuff went on.